At this time, I have the honor to present to you the moral leader of our nation. I have the pleasure to present to you Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And so we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. This sweltering summit of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. But that is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protests to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to a distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny. And they have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our body is heavy with the fatigue of travel. cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating for whites only. We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. I am not unmindful that some of you have come here out of great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells. Some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. Go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back to South Carolina. Go back to Georgia. Go back to Louisiana. Go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities. Knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. I say to you today, my friend, so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted. And every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is a faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, my country, tears of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the heightening Alleghanies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring. From the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. And when this happens, and when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Patu Washday. My name is Yo-Naja LoneWolf. I am a proud Oglala Lakota, Native American and Black woman, a human rights activist, national community organizer. And thank you all for coming, being a part of Indigenous Peoples Movement and Lakota People's Law Project, as well as Warrior Woman Project for this special Dr. Martin Luther King tribute legacy honoring his works in life. I am so happy to have these great panelists that is a part of wanting to be able to being a part of Indigenous Peoples Movement. We have, if we could just show everyone. Thank you so much. All right, we have, I'm going to have everyone introduce themselves. Gyasi.
Okay, Natanako Unagumsika. My name is Gyasi Ross. I come from the Blackfeet Nation, the Amskapi Pukani Nation. I am an attorney. I'm a father. I'm a professor, and I'm just really honored to be here as part of this panel to talk about Dr. King's legacy, what we're doing, not just they, you know, but to internalize it and make it about us, what we're doing, if we're living up to that legacy or not. So thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this panel.
Thank you so much, Gyasi. Attorney Gerald Griggs.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity to be a part of this Dr. King Day celebration. I'm Attorney Gerald Griggs. I'm the first Vice President of the Atlanta chapter of the NAACP. I am the former third Vice President of the State Conference of Georgia for the NAACP. And I'm a civil rights attorney and a social justice activist. And it's just an honor to be a part of this much needed conversation of where we're going with the dream. Are we fulfilling the dream of Dr. King? And I look forward to a robust conversation talking about one of the individuals I grew up looking up to, and hopefully we are able to follow in his footsteps and complete the dream. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Alejandra.
Hey everyone, my name is Alejandra, pronouns she and hers, and I'm joining y'all from Kahana Autumn Land, from Phoenix, Arizona, and I'm really happy to be here. I'm a community organizer facing deportation. I've been fighting immigration, detention, and imprisonment, and La Migra, deportation, surveillance, policing. So I come at this as understanding exactly what Martin Luther King was fighting for when he was asking folks to, all go to jail together. So I'm really honored to be here and share a little bit of the plight that we continue to resist in the name of justice for everyone. So I'm happy to be here amongst all you panelists, and happy Indigenous Peoples Day.
Thank you. Ankush. Oh, we cannot hear you. Okay, now we can hear you.
Thank you so much. Such a pleasure to be here. This is Ankush Lekar from India, but I'm also joining in from Austin, which is the home of Jubanos, Comanche, Sana, and Tonkawa people. I'm the co-founder of Adivasi Lives Matter, which is a grassroots Indigenous media organization where we mentor grassroots Indigenous youth to tell their own stories in their Indigenous languages. India is home to more than 700 Indigenous communities who speak more than 300-400 Indigenous languages. And so we stand in solidarity with Indigenous peoples everywhere in the world. And such an honor to be here among all of such esteemed people to be talking on MLK Day. Thank you.
Thank you. And the great Madonna.
Hello, everyone. My name is Madonna. I'm from the Cheyenne River Reservation in South Dakota. I'm very, very honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. So we just watched the speech. Oh my goodness. It for me, it resonates for what we're going through today. So I'm gonna ask you all, it's been 59 years since Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. made this historic speech that we just saw. Does it resonate with you? And you can insert your race or your nationality, people today. Madonna Thunderheart.
It's Thunderhawk.
Thunderheart. Hawk. I'm sorry. Anyway. Sorry.
It was amazing to me to hear the full speech again. My memory's not that good for dates and details, but then I was young, and I was very amazed because we got to hear it. We got to hear it. They didn't televise it all, as I remember, but I remember the highlights and the end of the speech. And the effect I think it had, because you have to remember there wasn't any media, there wasn't any kind of media back then, unless it was negative for Indigenous and people over. We had to depend on the local, non-native press, which was usually negative. So what we did here, now and then we'd get a whole that was put out by an organ that would give us what's going on. It was amazing. But in all those years since then, a lot of young people especially will ask me, what was the incident? What happened to you that kept you active and kept you going all these years? And it was really difficult for me to answer that, because how can you pinpoint anything like that, a question like that? But one of the things that I always on Martin Luther Day, the fact that some states, and it's a national holiday, that alone is a miracle. In my estimation, as an elder now. And but every year, when it comes on TV or radio, I listen to the speech. At least they don't do the whole speech, but the important parts of it. And I remember then how I felt And I always think that if nothing else, that are in those years of Martin Luther King was that's when I understood what it meant to be in it for the long haul. That's what I got out of what his legacy was. That it's just not for the, you know, it's not temporary. It's an ongoing struggle, and you have to keep yourself together and keep yourself ready and keep yourself going for that long haul. That's what I think to his legacy was for us, especially as Native people, because at that time there was so much going on during those years, and with the red power movement, the Black Power movement, those, you know, there was two, you know, what's the words for it? Two kind of frame of mind going on at the same time, you know. We were involved. We were in a lot of confrontation with the law enforcement. We were, you know, it was a different resistance for us. But I kept that in the back of my mind, and many of our people did. Is that the strength that you had to have and what you believe for the long haul? So that's what's helped me all these years, and I'm grateful for that. Grateful to Martin Luther King.
Thank you so much. Ankush, how does it resonate with you?
Thank you, YoNasDa. You know, it resonates at a few levels. As an individual, the civil rights movement gave rise to the reforms in the immigration movement. Someone like me, someone of my color, of my home, would not be in this country had it not been for the movement. And that is what has helped so many immigrants come and realize their dreams, maybe in some cases even escape from oppression back in their home countries. So there's definitely a positive note to that. But I also take this as such an immense responsibility, because everybody who's benefited from the civil rights movement, you know, it all comes with a huge responsibility, which I'm not very sure. I'll speak for people of my country, a lot of people from India who would be here in the US in high-paying jobs. I'm not sure if people are doing enough to raise voices, to stand in solidarity, to continue to fight for this, because it's an ongoing fight. It's not that a tick mark is done and you just enjoy the benefits from one moment onwards. So I think that has been one big learning, that social justice is an ongoing fight. It's almost like the rent that we pay for living on this planet on a day-to-day basis. It's not something that we take for granted. And what I also love from, you know, I've heard and read multiple of MLK's speeches and books and all, but what is the underlying fact is the unity in the fight. And I may speak a little more about this later as well, but in my work as a coach in digital storytelling, when I'm working with nonprofits in US, in Asia, in India, we see how cancel culture is increasing more and more and alienating people from one another. So I think that's a key takeaway for me from the speech that we just heard, and from the learnings of MLK, from the learnings of Gandhi, united in this purpose, and united in addressing the social injustice, and not losing sight of the larger systemic and institutional problems that we are all facing at varying degrees, of course, but that all of us face. So that's something from my end.
Thank you. Gyasi, how did this speech resonate with you?
Thank you very much, YoNaja, Queen. And thank you all, panel, for sharing your thoughts. Every time I hear one of somebody's thoughts, it sparks new thoughts for me. So thank you very much for that inspiration. The speech means something fundamentally different now than it did when, I've liked to thought of myself as a disciple of Dr. Martin Luther King. for a variety of reasons that I won't discuss right now. Maybe we might have time later on. But, you know, he's obviously iconic for all the United States, maybe the world, whether they truly adhere to his teachings or not, right? Everybody has a quote on their social media today from Dr. Martin Luther King, whether they actually live and execute those ideas or not. So he's iconic. He was always iconic. And, you know, as a child, I was exposed to that from my grandparents, and I'm thankful for that. And, you know, it was resonating for a different reason when I was a kid. Now, when I look back, one of my mentors / heroes, his name is Hank Adams. He just passed December of 2020. He worked hand in hand with another indigenous man by the name of Uncle Billy Frank, member of the Nisqually tribe up here in Washington State. And they effectively started the treaty rights movement. They started the treaty rights movement by refusing to allow the State Department of Wildlife to kick them off their treaty and an ancestral inherent right to fish, as they have for tens of thousands of years, as their folks have done for tens of thousands of years. And 2 weeks before Dr. Martin Luther King was tragically assassinated, Hank Adams sat with Dr. Martin Luther King, and they were talking about integrating these different conversations regarding treaty rights, which up here in the Pacific Northwest, there's a long history of Black support for Native treaty rights. In fact, the ancestor Dick Gregory, amazing man, went to jail, did a hunger strike on behalf of the natives in this area to bring attention to the treaty rights deprivations and violations that were going on in this area. There's a long history, and that's what Hank Adams and Dr. Martin Luther King, they met to discuss that. And I think about how prescient and prophetic Dr. Martin Luther King was to bring other communities into this struggle. He did that generously and graciously. He did not have to do that. The support was not coming from Native communities reciprocally. The support was not coming from Asian American communities reciprocally. The support was not coming from Latino and Latina communities reciprocally. It was there, but it was aberrations. The vast majority did not want to get involved with this. And Dr. Martin Luther King still said, we want you to be down. We want you to be a part of this. So much that he was willing to extend an olive branch and say, look, I want to involve indigenous people, specifically my community. I want you to involve indigenous people in this. And I don't care if you benefit. I want you to benefit. I want it to actually be disproportionately beneficial to you because I have a very, very strong thing going here. And that's largely how civil rights movements have gone. We've seen that same trajectory and momentum of Black civil rights leadership willing to extend that movement and momentum to other communities. Black Lives Matter. That started a whole host of movement within the Native community. That started from there. It was a Black spark that lit this other fire. And I think that Dr. Martin Luther King set that example of being willing to share that spark to other communities without even the knowledge, without even the desire, and without even the realization that he knew it wasn't going to happen. There wasn't going to be the full reciprocity, but I want you to benefit anyway. And I think if we could be more selfless like that and willing to lend our spark and not be hostile and put our movements into silos. No, this is a Native thing. No, this is a, whatever thing. If we were more willing to do that and realize that this is a big picture, that justice for one is justice for all, that justice is not a zero-sum game. So if Black people get justice, well, that takes away from Native justice. If we start to realize those things, and I think Dr. Martin Luther King created the model for that, that's when we start to win and make inroads into the hands, the claws of injustice and those purveyors of injustice.
Beautiful. Alejandra, is her camera on? We just see her. Hey.
Hey,
Okay.
everyone.
This question is going to go for you and for Attorney Gerald Griggs. So I have you go first. August 6th, 1965. President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act into law. The law came 7 months after Dr. King launched the Southern Christian Leadership Conference campaign based in Selma, Alabama, pressuring Congress to pass legislation. Today, do you believe our votes are being suppressed? If yes, how? In what ways can we learn from Dr. King and the way he and others organize? Now, mind you, this was a time during they didn't have social media, or none of that in order for them to pass that.
Thank you for that question. Hey, everyone. I kind of second what everybody's been saying. I really appreciate everybody's experience. And I think for myself, when I think about the voting rights movement or just disenfranchising communities, right, I learned a lot about abolitionists, and as an immigrant Mexican woman from the border, really seeing how just any of the democracy we have now, it has been due to Black resistance. And the same things that have been happening, right, historically to Black folks, right, have been used and used twice or just started to use on other community members, right? And we see even right now, actually apply for immigrant folks or non-citizen folks to vote, right? We see that happening in the local elections in New York. We're seeing movements like that happen in California to vote, because I think voting rights or voting has been the way that we've defined, having a voice. And I really appreciate Martin Luther King's legacy, because he was also talking about anti-capitalism, right? Trying to figure out what really works for us to, see freedom reign for everyone. And I think what really resonates now still is the fact that we're still being suppressed, right? There's still a lot of corruptness when it comes to democracy, quote unquote, right? And I really value a lot of the voting rights movement, a lot of my comrades that are still doing electoral work, and how tough it is because of all the barriers that are being built. And I think it's one way to disenfranchise us, right? We're called illegal folks, right? From felons to illegal folks. So for me, what really is a moment right now for us to really understand the history of the United States. I really appreciate the author in the book, the 1619 Project, which has taught me a lot and grounded me and everything that I already knew, right? That I'm living and that I'm experiencing. So I think I've been a part of several voter suppression campaigns. And again, it's all racial justice work. It's all coming still from the legacy of MLK. And it's really sad that we're still fighting for the same stuff, right? The same things still reign today from that speech. And I just, again, really, I'm thankful for Black leadership, Black women and girls who've been fighting for, as an immigrant woman who's being caged over and over again, really understands how again, our immigration status has been really politicized. We've been very politicized, this political game, these pawns against each other, when we've created illegal, quote unquote, people, right? They're socially, the idea of immigrant folks, it's a social idea, but we can never be legalized, right? That is what we've been sold. And I think there's communities like us resisting, right? Organizing to build our power through voices, even though we might not be able to vote. We're still organizing, we're still moving, we're still shifting culture, right? We have folks right now talking about abolishing immigration customs enforcement, right? Chinga la migra and abolishing ICE. And I think MLK would have been pro abolishing ICE. But again, it's us, the work on the ground of us shifting culture and sharing our stories individually to get people to understand that no policing works, right? When we defund police, we're going to see less deportations. We're going to see less violence in our communities, point and blank. So I think all of these things are connected, and I'm just really thankful for the moments that we're in right now, where we are able to make those connections and we're able to resist and understand that this immigrant fight is a Black issue as well, and we've been learning from Black abolitionists. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Attorney Gerald Griggs.
Yes, and again, thank you for having me on the platform. Growing up in Georgia, on Peachtree, 10 years after being born, 10 years after Dr. King was assassinated, it's very important that we continue to struggle. And so, as you know, here in Georgia, we're ground zero for voter suppression with SB 202 and the fight that continues to make sure we have electoral power. But being an African-American man growing up with parents that were in the civil rights movement and now being in the social justice movement, I think we can use the same tactics that we used in the past to make sure we protect the vote and enhance access to the ballot. So I just think that his legacy and his speech all of the themes rang true today. We're still struggling with the unsweltering horrors of police brutality. We are still dealing with the vestiges of Jim Crow, called Jim Crow 2.0. And we are still dealing with people who don't want to fully accept the full history of this country. We shouldn't be having a conversation about whether or not we should be banning CRT. This country needs to grapple with the original sin of African chattel slavery, the fact that we have not received reparations, the fact that we are having to fight some 50 years later for the protections that were guaranteed under Dr. King's protests and his campaign. So I'm just, every time I hear that speech, it speaks directly to my soul. When I hear that freedom reign should reign from Stone Mountain, Georgia, and from Lookout Mountain, I've been to both. And we have to deal with the carving on the side of the mountain here in DeKalb County. So I just think that all of these themes reign true. And the great thing about Dr. King was he called people in instead of calling them out. I think there needs to be some calling out, but I do believe in the big tent. And I believe that my issues are your issues and your issues are my issues. So when we have issues that are going on with our Indigenous brothers and sisters and our brothers and sisters that love a little differently, and of course our brothers and sisters that are having issues because of what's happening at the border, I think all of those issues are intersectional. And from my mentor, John Lewis, who was at all of those protests, or my other mentor, C.T. Vivian, who always called us to remember that we all must join together and we must succeed because we live in a world house. So the speech always calls me into the fact that we're in a world house, that Black people have been on the front line since we were brought here, since 1619, and we will not give up. We will always include everyone else in the struggle and assist them in the struggle, but we must always focus on the fact that all it takes for evil to conquer is for good people to do nothing. And so I think that's the crux of the speech, and that's what we have to continue to push forward for in our electoral activism.
Beautiful. For everyone that's tuning in, if you have any questions, go ahead and ask the question in the chat box, and then we'll bring up your question. One of the most famous people that inspired Dr. King was Gandhi from India. He wrote that Gandhi was a guiding light for him on using the same method of nonviolent civil disobedience. In your works of organizing, what people, leaders, have you been inspired by and applied it in your organizing work that wasn't the same race as you? Madonna?
Could you repeat that again?
Yes, ma'am. One of the most famous people that inspired Dr. King was Gandhi from India. He wrote that Gandhi was a guiding light for him on using the same method of non-violent civil disobedience. In your works of organizing, what people, leaders, have you been inspired by and applied it in your organizing work that wasn't the same race as you?
Oh my gosh, so many. I guess when I was younger, there were two women that I remember that influenced me. One of them, they were famous, of course. One was Angela Davis, and the other one was gee, can't remember. It slipped my mind. Anyway, again, back in those days, of course, repeating myself, but the media was real limited. So we didn't get to know a lot of the detail and stuff of all we heard was what was broadcast about the negative, if they had anything to do with, went to jail or had anything to do with the police or anything. But there was very little of role models, especially for women. It was limited for us because we didn't get to see and do and have the interaction. But as time went on, we did. So it was real, I guess, local. There wasn't any obvious local, regional anyway, role models that I can think of that were in the civil rights movement. But outside of that, for example, on the West Coast, you know, when I was out there on Alcatraz Island in 1969. So I had a good chance to meet with a lot of the women that were in the Black Panther party at the time, because we worked with them. They did a lot of supplies and things for the people on the island during the occupation. So it was more or less women that at that time nobody was famous. I mean, you know, we were just all in it together, you know. And like Dolores Huerta, I remember marching with her. You know, we were just two women. You know, we were young and we were, you know, and we were involved. So there was many of that I was, you know, that were like in my same peer group. But the famous ones, of course, were we saw, you know, and but it was important for them too. I think Angela Davis, to me, I could see it matched up to me with the academic world, but also with the intellectual, because I had no reference back in the day, you know, and she opened the door for me to think, you know, and that the possibilities, but at the same time to make a stand and actually go to jail for your values and what you believe, you know. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, Angela Davis was off the chain. I remember my mother was full-blood Lakota, and she said that's who inspired her too. She said that big old, she said she tried to put her hair in an afro and it just didn't happen, but but she said she said she was inspired by Angela Davis and Dolores Huerta. Oh my goodness. Phenomenal, and you're absolutely right. You and Angela Davis is very much in comparison of the life and the works that both of you all have accomplished. Alejandra, someone that's not the same race as you, that has inspired you in your organizing and that you have applied this person. It don't have to be famous, by the way. It could be anyone that's not the same race as you in your organizing work.
Do I look like I'm famous? All of these folks will be brown folks. First of all, I think I want to just share, I love this question. I was thinking about it and I was like, I hope I could ask this. So I really, really appreciate the organizing work of Bamboo de Pistola, beat rock music. Actually, it's a collective of Filipino rappers and artists, and they also organize. So you not only see them doing free concerts for people that have been impacted by police violence, right? People that we've lost. They self-organize concerts, right? Their music is all about organizing folks, literally like organizing albums that they have. So I truly have been inspired by that kind of movement work. I'm myself trying to do a movement album. Again, get a lot of our artists, other people that I organize that are formerly incarcerated. And I just really love seeing the organizing the Filipino bring. They have they're very centered in their colonization history, right? So I really appreciate that. We have a lot of similarities. So respects to beat rock music, y'all should check them out. Rocky Rivera, Bamboo de Pistola, a lot of them, they are just, again, continuing to plug folks in and keep pushing for folks to organize. It's really, really important. And I think overall, hands down, like I mentioned before, you know, due to Black resistance, we have citizenship, we have almost all the rights that we have right now because of Black resistance. And for myself personally, in the growth of my activism and organizing, I've been learning from many Black women, especially coming out of DC. A lot of us were, you know, travel to DC to build skills to bring back to your hometowns. And I was one of those people, and I met a lot of great Black diaspora folks and a lot of Caribbean, Spanish-speaking Black folks. And just really learning from young girls and queer and trans people, especially again in the DC area where we cross a lot of spaces through there. You know, I think I was able to come back and kind of bring a lot of what I see other people organizing collectively, cooperatively, you know, internationally, which is really, really important. And I think, again, at the roots of abolition, right, at the roots of decreasing, have, you know, to build with strategies that are decreasing the power of the state. So I'm a big fan of Black abolitionists. Thank you all for being here.
All right. Ankush, not the same race as you. That have any organizers or leaders that have inspired you and that you implied their organizing work in the work that you do?
You know, I think I'm always learning and continue to learn from the incredible Indigenous youth in different parts of India, in different parts of the world. I want to give a shout out to Ashish Biruli. He's one of our co-founders, and he could not be here because this is too early in the morning for him. Back in India. But 3 generations of his have fought against nuclear radiation poisoning. His homeland is home to India's first uranium deposits and uranium mining. And for 3 generations, he lost his grandparents, both grandmother and grandfather, to cancer because of radiation poisoning. And his father and he became his community's first internationally published photojournalist. And you know, it's incredible. The Indigenous youth who are taking forth media in their own hands and telling their own stories. I look back at the time of MLK and 1960s, and now one major change which has taken place is the access to media. The internet is not as democratic as one would have liked it to be, but the creation of stories, the creation of content by the Indigenous youth themselves is extremely inspiring. One such amazingly inspiring lady is Archana Soreng, who is from India. She is an Indigenous girl, and she is part of the United Nations Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. She's representing India and the millions of Indigenous peoples from there. Shuteska from the US, how he uses music for activism. I mean, just so many people. I also want to definitely talk about the Waorani leader who was recognized by the Time magazine. Somehow, recognition by these magazines is what brings them on an international stage and makes them more well-known. But been following the work of the Waorani peoples in the Ecuadorian Amazon for a really, really long time. And I don't know if I'm decimating the pronunciation of a name, Nimonte Nenquimo. Just very, very inspiring fights. And, you know, people taking their own fights into their own hands and leading the way. There's so many, and YoNasDa, you and all the people on this panel, each of you know so many stories of names. Like Alejandro said, I'm not famous. That applies. The real fight takes place on the feet, on the ground, on the roads. And those names are not necessarily always celebrated or published in books or in magazines or on news websites or wherever. But that is what keeps the momentum going. You know, it's the token names are obviously the ones which we know and we celebrate, the names of leaders who may speak at UN or whatever. But it's the real people on the ground who keep doing this on a day-to-day basis. And I think I keep drawing inspiration on an ongoing basis. Your work, YoNasDa, your work as Indigenous peoples movements, and how, you know, how IPM is actually creating a coalition across borders, I think is extremely inspiring to us at Adivasi Lives Matter. It really helps to know that there are people 17,000 kilometers away, 11,000 miles away, who share solidarity with you, and that you're not alone in this fight. And so that definitely helps all of us. It helps us at ALM. It helps being a part of the larger conversation. It's also good and bad, right? I mean, I'm a part of 2 of the largest democracies, India and United States.
Right.
And to see both of them being fractured in similar ways, and to also, but see the inspiring work that young activists are doing, is just very, very, very inspiring. So yeah, those are the people that continue to inspire me. And I would be amiss if I wouldn't mention each and every one on this panel right now. Each of you inspire with your work, with your words and your thoughts. So thank you. Thank you for sharing what you're doing.
Okay, thank you. Gyasi. Who inspires you, leaders that are not the same race as you?
Thank you. That's a complicated
that you have actually put it in your work as well.
Yeah, like you, YoNasDa Queen. I'm Native and Black, and so I have had access, genetically and culturally to the, to the two, greatest groups of storytellers in the world, and excuse me. And also, there's lines of change makers along those genetic and cultural lines. I don't necessarily believe in race, so I'm gonna give that caveat, and I'm gonna give myself a little bit of flexibility here. There's a man locally here in Seattle. His name was Roberto Maestas. He passed some years ago, and he was of indigenous ancestry as well. So again, we're kind of blurring lines. But he was somebody who saw the power of grouping. They had a group, they had a group called the Gang of Four, which was 4 different people from different ethnic groups: Native, Asian American, Black, and him, Latino. And they made momentous change in this area, creating institutions for historically overlooked and undervalued people. And again, similar to the conversation that we had about why the Martin Luther King speech still resonates with me, or resonates with me for different reasons, it's because he saw the power of working in coalition with other groups. That's going to be a consistent theme. Spoiler alert. that's going to be a consistent theme as I move forward, because I truly believe that as long as we, we're Smeagol and we have our little precious, and oppression Olympics right here in our hand, and we don't share and don't try to work with other communities, other institutions, other agencies, and other individuals, that we will continue to get limited results. There's a line by Poor Righteous Teachers. He said, why can't we, the Black community, come together to conquer the opponent? Because if we show just a small sense of unity, everything the eyes see me before, we'd own it. And I was raised with that. That album came out when I was 13 years old, and it's always stuck with me that, if you want to get someplace fast, you go alone. If you want to get someplace far, you go together. And that, anytime I see a person who I consider to be a hero or a shero or a role model, they're going to have that ethic where they're not a lone wolf. They're not a Clint Eastwood type that, I'm just going to go trek this by myself because I'm macho. No, I have needs. I'm limited. I have vulnerabilities. And very importantly, I'm going to die someday. And if I don't have a coalition to be able to prop up the, excuse me, the same ideologies, the same goals, the same aspirations, the same dream in Dr. Martin Luther King parlance, if I don't have a structure that is just equally as strong as me, or equally as strong as the community I come from, or not stronger, then that movement dissipates. And we don't need that. We don't need one, charismatic leader. We don't need one person to take the charge. We need a group that everybody has buy-in, everybody understands the assignment, as the kids are saying, everybody's focused on ultimately what the goal is. My second role model is not necessarily, again, I'm gonna play fast and loose with the idea of race, but is Amilcar Cabral. And Amilcar Cabral, to me, obviously there's the revolutionary phase of trying to get the Portuguese, out and all that stuff. There's the actual fighting of war, and that was powerful. And he was an amazing leader. And he was somebody who understood the bigger picture in regards to that particular, goal that what ultimately was the goal, which was independence. But what I take from Amilcar Cabral, and I institute this in my life, whether it's having this conversation right now or whether I'm giving a voir dire in a criminal trial or closing statement in a criminal trial, is that all of these things are stories. And Amilcar Cabral understood the power of stories, and that we are blessed to come to descend from the strongest, most powerful storytellers in the world. That's an ancestral right. It's in our DNA. And so we utilize that, because when people hear our stories, it's stranger than fiction. It's something that, no, that couldn't really happen. I was listening to a story today about a book called 400 Souls that chronicles the 400 years of slavery, and it's written from a whole bunch, 80 different authors' perspective. And the stories are absolutely stories that would cause outrage just by the telling of the stories, in the same way Attorney Griggs was talking about outlawing CRT because apparently it's gonna offend some delicate white sensibilities. Telling these stories would offend those sensibilities. But like CRT, it's 100% true. And that shock, that outrage that people get, that's the conscience. That's what you actually want. I want to speak to your soul. I want to have this conversation with your soul. This larger question of what we're fulfilling Dr. King's legacy, fulfilling his dream. The answer is no for all of us. And we have a natural gravitational pull toward justice. We want things to go right. We want, in fact, peace. Every single human being on the earth wants peace. We're a long ways away from there. And every once in a while, there's something that reminds us of that. And those stories that offend the spirit, that feel like, oh, I should not be hearing this because it's so ugly, it's so dark, but it's also 100% true. That's how we start to get there, sharing our story. And so that's the reason why I lean heavily on Amilcar Cabral.
Thank you for that. Which goes into this. This question is going to be for everyone, but I'm going to have Attorney Gerald Griggs answer it first. After the murder of George Floyd was a huge response from people from all walks of life, wanting to center the injustice of Black people. During this time, we saw Latinos, Native Americans, Asians, whites, Indians, and many people from various parts of the world uniting for change and organizing for change. In what ways can we begin to use that same method of organizing to fight for Native American, Latino, and Asian injustices? And are we ready to center Latinos, Native Americans, Asians, Indians, and more, or are we still looking at everything in Black and white?
I think that's a great question, and thank you for asking it. I think after watching 9 minutes and 29 seconds of a man's life being choked out of him, after watching a man being chased by 3 white men and hit by a car and shot, and then learning about a young African-American female that was in her house and she was executed, I think that people were sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so the whole world came together to fight for justice and to see that the voices of Black people needed to be lifted up. But one thing I can tell you assuredly of Black people is that we have such a big heart that we call everyone in, so that our struggle is not just the struggle of Black people in America, it's the struggle of all people all over the world. And so I think the world is ready to have this conversation and to move to movement. I think that's what Dr. King was talking about. I know that all of the great fighters of the past were all talking about this, especially in the global perspective. And I think what it's going to take is to name the oppressor, the evil that we're all fighting. And that's white supremacy. It's quite clear, whether that's called imperialism, colonization, racism, slavery, what's happening right now with immigration, LGBTQIA, it all stems from the same oppressive system that has already cast lots for people's abilities and where they will stack in the social structure. So I think that that's what Dr. King was talking about. And I agree with everyone here that's saying, are we fulfilling the dream? The answer is no. because we are still having the same conversation about defeating white supremacy. And that's not to call all of our white brothers and sisters anything other than children of God. It's the structures, it's the systems that have to be addressed. That's why I like when we start talking about systemic oppression and systemic racism. It's not labeling one group of people, it's focused on the systems. And I think the world is ready to have this conversation. It's a global conversation. So, you know, I can't speak for all Black people, but what I can speak for is the people that are on the front lines. And they have continually said through George and through Brianna and through all the things that we've been a part of, how can we help others? How can we instill this fight in others, whether it's voting rights, whether it's women's rights, whether it's immigration issues, whether it's LGBTQ issues? We want to fight for everyone. It just so happened that George centered Black voices in a way that Black voices needed to be centered. So I think the short answer is we have to deal with the systems that are set up to oppress, and we have to call it out, and we have to do it in season and out of season, but we are ready to push back and to make sure everyone has that same energy moving forward.
Thank you for that. Madonna, this question is the same questions for you, but I want to say all of us are honored to be in your presence, you being the elder on this panel, but also in the movement. You just spoke about being at Alcatraz. I was born during the longest walk, which, you know, in Washington, D.C. When my mother got to Washington, D.C., she ended up having me from that walk. But, you know, you just said that the Black Panthers were there. You know, these movements, I think that, and you could tell me if I'm wrong or right, but what I always saw in the movements from Alcatraz or the American Indian movement, or it was a lot of unity happening amongst people of color. And so this question is for you, because you have been a part of these movements before we were born, and you have seen it go through all of the ups and downs and the dividing and the unity and all of that. And so I think you have I know that you will have some wisdom for us in regards to this. So in what ways can we begin to use that same method of organizing to fight for Native American, Latinos, and Asians injustices, or are we ready to center Latinos, Native Americans, Asians, Indians, and more, or are we still looking at everything in black and white?
You know, just listening to others talk about it and just the issue itself, it just amazes me. I was thinking, oh God, I wish I had another 50 years or even 10 years, you know, because I mean, the thing about being an activist or being involved is that, you know, you can switch gears, you know, you can change direction, you know, anything that works, or you try it out and see if it works. And if it doesn't, you try something else, you know. And I think that one of the things we learned well, didn't learn, it just, I don't know if I'm saying it right, but it just kind of like happened automatically back in the late 60s and the 70s. Especially in the West Coast, because that's where I'm, Alcatraz, the occupation of Alcatraz. But it was like everybody just kind of, it was automatic solidarity, you know. And even before the occupation of Alcatraz, there were you know, we marched with the farm workers, you know, and I remember when the Black Panthers started the breakfast programs, and they were community oriented, you know. That's why they were so effective and so powerful, because when you're community connected, then that's your strength. And so it was just kind of like that we helped each other out, basically, you know, because again, it was everybody was kind of like starting out of the gate at the same time. You know, you can look back at it from, you know, point of view of, well, who were the leaders and what were the highlights of the movement, that kind of thing. I don't like to hear that, because that isn't even how it was. You know, we were all young and we were all just new to the whole, and it was just, you know, the strength in numbers. So it was just kind of like almost automatic that people of color pulled together. And then after what happened with George Floyd and others, you know, all of that, I was watching that and I was thinking, all right, what's really going on here for everybody nationwide? Those racists we know, those, you know, Trump cultists, you know, we know those people they're in charge because they had think tanks while we were trying to worry about, you know, civil rights and equal rights and justice and all those other kinds of issues we're constantly faced with. They were having think tanks and they were taking over law enforcement departments nationwide. Who are the chiefs of police? Who are the sheriffs? Who's doing the hiring? How is it you can shoot down a person of color but not a white man or a white boy with an automatic weapon, and they can still walk away and they don't even get shot or killed or even roughed up? You know? Why? Because look behind the scene. Who's in charge? Who's in charge of the keys at all the jails, all the prisons? You know? And that's why I see, you know, you know, the tactics we need to use is, you know, it has to come from that perspective. So I think the most important fight today is the voting. And once we get by this, the next generation, they'll be fighting that too. Because those racists and the powers that be are not going to give up, because they are still in control. They're outnumbered and they know it. So they're running scared, but they still control the economy. And they still control the systems. So you're right, the systems are workers. Anyway, I got fired up.
Thank you. No, I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. Thank you. Alejandra, you would have answered that question as well?
Yeah, I think the question was just, I think, a little bit of how I think of the world ready for Latino, Asian folks to be centered. Am I correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I guess I just wanted to share a really quick answer. And my really initial just body reaction was like, it doesn't really matter, right? We're here, we're home, right? We're organized, and I think that's what we're just learning. I think this is what I think I haven't been experiencing as an organizer maybe for the past 10 years is, again, really going back into our roots of like learning and unlearning. And we're here no matter what, right? We're actually asking you to, you know, also know that people who've been formerly incarcerated, people who have convictions also have dignity and they also deserve respect, right? And no matter what you say, we're pushing for that, right? This is a moment where people are using tools to get folks to, you know, avoid deportation, whether they've had, you know, whatever crimes or convictions, because we know that the people in power are labeling what's a crime, right? And what hood you're in, right? Or again, creating activities that us brown people, Asian people are a part of and making those illegal, right? So there's just a collective understanding and a big shift for us to really be at the intersections, right? Be at the intersections, talking about our identities and our neighborhoods, right? And doing this through cultural work. So we're here regardless either way. And I think that's what we have to keep, you know, we have to keep organizing. And I think I always honor the voting rights movement because that's where I got politicized. That's where I started to inform myself of what kind of organizer I want to be, what kind of storyteller I want to be, what side I want to be on, who I want to defend. So I'm here for all criminalized people, understanding that we have, again, a lot of experiences that move us, that shape us, and we're here for all of us or none.
Thank you. We have a question from from the chats. Someone, Alejandra, you might want to pronounce this for me. My Spanish isn't that good. Tesaros de Tomas. I hope I said it right. My greatest takeaway from Martin Luther King's speech is peaceful cooperation. Does anyone on this panel think that the creation of a political party for the inclusion of all humanity would be the good way to meet our collective goals? Anyone?
I'll just say that's tesoros de Tomás, but I do not want to answer that question.
Okay, thank you. Put the question back up again. Anyone want to answer that question? Let me read it again. And our greatest takeaway from Martin Luther King's speech is peaceful cooperation. Does anyone on this panel think that the creation of a political party for the inclusion of all humanity would be the good way to meet our collective goals?
I'll take the question.
Mr. Ungovernable, hashtag. I say that because Gyasi, when he tweets, he puts hashtag ungovernable. So this is a really great question for you.
Well, my thought on it is a little bit more, I guess, spiritual. That the creation of a new political party, just like teaching critical race theory, which, by the way, everybody understands that critical race theory is not taught in any public school K through 12 in the whole nation. You realize that, right? That's a big white herring. It's not something that actually happens. What folks are contesting is the teaching of actual history, not even critical race theory, but critical race theory, teaching real history. Those are what is called in the treatment world harm reduction. We're talking about harm reduction, and harm reduction is a notion from the treatment world where, okay, well, this person, I come from, there's a lot of addiction in my family. My father was a heroin addict. He got addicted in Vietnam, and a lot of Black veterans did. He came back and he wasn't going to stop using heroin. So, okay, well, let's make sure that he has clean needles. That's harm reduction. We're not getting rid of the problem, but we're changing the veneer a little bit to make it seem like it's more palatable, or it's at least, you know, a little bit more politically correct, softer, kinder. And so it's a kinder type of addiction. Similarly, creating a new political party for the purpose of harm reduction is tempting, and it's seductive, and it might even be something that, you know, brings the discourse to a certain place. But I submit that within a inherently corrupt system, whether we're talking about the legal system, whether we're talking about the political system, whether we're talking about the educational system, within an inherently corrupt and racist and abusive system like that, changing some of the veneer is not a solution. It's a harm reduction technique, because the system is so corrupted that you're never going to get satisfactory results or outcomes within that system. The answer is, and it's painful and it's scary, and I'm not advocating for anything in particular, but I'm just seeing from a lot of anecdotal years within the criminal justice system, a lot of years observing the educational system, a lot of years observing the political system, is that there has to be a new genesis. There has to be a new creation of those stories, because those stories are messed up fundamentally, inherently, down to a molecular level. And once something, I made a couple of hip hop quotes earlier. KRS-One very famously said, you know, there can never be justice on stolen land. So we have to extract down to a level of molecular basis all of those systems, take a house down to the studs. Know that drywall is already rotted, that siding is already rotted, that wiring is knob and tube, that plumbing is old and decrepit. We got to get rid of that stuff, because as long as you're dealing with that decrepit, nasty, corrupted infrastructure, there's no way for it to go correctly. all we can deal with is within the regime of harm reduction.
Thank you for that. All right, so I have one last question for everyone. And, you know, the reason why I felt that it was important for us to do this panel and to have such a diverse group of panelists is because of the fact that that is the works of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., is to be able to bring people from all walks of life and for us to be able to have a various perspective on his life. Today we saw a lot of quotes on Dr. King, and everyone is quoting him. And I saw a tweet, someone said, well, if you're going to quote Dr. King, let's live. You could put me in. I don't like to. You could put me in with everyone. Okay, thank you. I like to see everyone with quoting Dr. King. It was a tweet that went out. I forgot who was the author, but they were saying that, you know, let's live what he said 364 days of the year. And there was a lot of other speeches that a lot of people, we do see I Have a Dream, you know, but there's so many more speeches and so much works that I encourage everyone to be able to research. One of the things that he said before he went to the Washington, D.C. was, let's go get that check. We're going to get our check. And he spoke about that the day before, before he went up to D.C. He said, we're going to get this check. You know, and we're talking, you know, so there's so much works of Dr. King. He also said for everyone we're going to boycott the Wonder Bread. And what was the other businesses, Attorney Gerald Griggs? It was a list of businesses that Dr. King
said, it was
a
list
boycott.
of businesses. And his last campaign was in Memphis, where he was with the sanitation workers, and they were going to strike with the sanitation workers. So, you know, and I think what the question you were about to ask is, you know, something about Dr. King's speeches outside of I Had a Dream. And the one that's most impactful to me is the last speech, where he said he's been to the mountaintop, he's looked over and he's seen the promised land. And he may not get there with you, but we will get to the promised land. And I think what I always think about on King Day is not about the dream, okay? We have to wake up from the dream. We have to get to the promised land, because we're talking about 50 years later and we're still quoting the dream, where we are the generation of Martin, my generation, and we have another generation that's here. And so I think that what I would like to leave people with is this: don't quote Dr. King on King Day or his actual birthday, which is January the 15th, if you're not doing the work, if you're trying to suppress people's votes, if you're trying to dissuade people from teaching the truth, if you're trying to prevent people from coming to this country to be a part of what America says it is on paper. So I would ask people to go research the last speech. Pick up his last book, Community of Chaos, Where We Go From Here, and actually read the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and then apply it to your life.
That's beautiful. Thank you for that, because a lot of people do not know all of that. If we could we had one last question coming in. If you could just go ahead and post that to the tech team. I can't read it. Thank you. Just go ahead and post it. I can't see the question. All right. We might be having technical difficulties. Okay. Do any panelists have thoughts on this quote from Nelson Mandela? It was recently quoted in the book, How to Blow Up a Pipeline. I called for nonviolent protest for as long as it was effective as a tactic that should be abandoned when it no longer is there any more? Okay.
I guess there's a word limit on how big a message you can put down there.
Yeah.
On the words.
Yeah. So we're just thank you for that question to John, Jenny, but we can't answer it because we're not seeing the full question. We apologize for that. Okay, so everyone, Looking at the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., what is the most memorable thing about him that has empowered you? And then any last words, last thoughts that you would like to close everyone out with? Alejandra?
What was the last question, Vanessa?
Looking at the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., what is the most memorable thing about him that has empowered you? And then if you have any last words or thoughts that you would like to put in that answer.
Yeah, great, thanks. I think if I have to say, the one thing that most impacted me was maybe his writings from inside a cage. You know, things that resonate so much now. We're seeing how, you know, there's obviously a crisis of mass incarceration, and how even people protesting on the streets, even in the uprising, every locality, police, right, we're creating laws to basically give these folks felonies, right, for speaking up, for First Amendment and so forth. So I think just really understanding and making seeing how most of us have family members we love that have been incarcerated, right, that are impacted, right, that are still under surveillance. And I think that's something that really empowers me. And that's something that I do now, is I keep writing, even when I do have to go back into courts and defend my humanity against immigration judges. So I don't have any last words, but I just want to thank everyone for being here.
Thank you so much. Ankush?
Thank you. Thank you. You know, the principles of nonviolence, and I think there were about 6 principles in MLK Jr.'s handout. But I think Gandhi, MLK, Mandela, I think some of the big leaders who've been in long movements see the long-standing nature of movements. And I think that is something that sometimes it is possible that we miss the sight of that. You know, it is very natural, extremely natural to be riled up. But to sustain the movement, to sustain a movement for systemic change, and to really shake the foundations of these oppressive structures, it has to be built on the foundations of nonviolence and peace, is what I gather from great leaders like MLK, like Gandhi. And nonviolence in action, nonviolence in thought, nonviolence in the spoken word. I know it is easier said than done, and this is something that is an ongoing struggle on a day-to-day basis in the works that we do, because the people who we are speaking with or standing up against have no semblance of nonviolence in them. But that, to me, is what necessitates it even more, peace and nonviolence. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts.
Well, thank you. Gyasi?
I suppose the thing that, you know, sticks with me the most is compassion. I think maybe I'm just getting old and soft. I'm not sure. I'm going to psychoanalyze what I think it was Jean Genie was asking regarding Nelson Mandela's quote of, you know, if nonviolence brings you to a certain place and then it stops working. And I'm thinking it might have been, you know, well, do you change that tactic? And I don't think we can. I think we absolutely have every right and need to defend ourselves. But I don't think that, and I think this is something consistent with Dr. Martin Luther King. I think this is something consistent with Gandhi. I think this is something consistent with a lot of the leaders who brought us to a place of having these conversations, which is, yes, absolutely defend ourselves. But I don't think seeking violence on a level that's consistent or commensurate with our oppressors gets us any place. One reason is practical. That practical reason is they always have more guns. That's something that's always the case. I'm from Montana. I'm from the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. That's very much gun rights territory. And I don't mean to be crude, but I guess I do. If we're talking about just private arms, the numbers are absolutely amazing. They're staggering how much more private arms white people have than Black folks, than Native people, than Latinos, Latinas. It's not even close. So we're talking private arms. But if we're talking about the state, which as Attorney Griggs mentioned, and you know, we have to look at institutions. And when we're looking at institutions, our little guns, we're not going to contend with the National Guard. We're not going to contend with the Army. We're not going to contend with the Marines. So looking at it from that perspective is very fatalistic, and in my opinion, very immature. So just from a practical perspective. But from a spiritual perspective, which I think is more the theme of tonight and this day, I don't think it behooves us ever to slay Goliath to become Goliath. I don't think that was the intent. I think melanated people particularly, just my personal theory, I think there's a certain amount of inherent compassion. I think there's compassion that is compacted and carried in melanin, just like it's an incredible bonder for boxing. You know, it keeps our skin together. It keeps moisture better. It has a certain amount of collagen in there that keeps us looking a certain way for long periods of our life. I think that there's compassion that's carried in there. And I think losing that love, slaying Goliath to become Goliath, so we can become the oppressors, so we can be the folks who are doing wrong, instead of slaying Goliath to make a more equitable, just, and loving society. I think that's when we effectively lose the battle. And so I think that we have to keep those tenets of nonviolence. We have to keep those tenets of being the bigger person, and trying to, again, always willing to defend ourselves, but not looking for the smoke. And I think that that's how we win over the course of time, by passing these stories, by passing these values, by passing these morals to our children and saying, this is now your obligation. You have to consistently contend and be the bigger person. Show by example the way that Dr. Martin Luther King did. Be willing to go to jail for it. Be willing to die for it. But more importantly, be willing to live for it every single day in those small incremental battles that we have every single day in the schools, in courthouses, in medical facilities, and for voting rights. All of those things, we have to be willing to set that example consistently. And so that's my thought. That's what my takeaway is from that. Thank you very much for the question. Thank you.
Madonna, how has the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King empowered you? And if there's anything, closing remarks that you would like to share alongside that.
Well, like I mentioned before, like I said before, I'm just grateful that, you know, during that time and that era, I remember him. I remember those days, you know, and we were all so naive, and we were all young, and nothing like that had ever happened before. Not in, you know, that we could remember anyway at the time. You know, it was all new, awakening for everyone. And I never got to read things that he wrote or whatever. For me, it's just what I heard, what I knew of him and what I heard about him, and the few speeches I did hear him, is that it was just something you could reflect back on, you could touch, you know, and know that there was people that thought that way, and that, you know, that it's a way of sustaining your commitment and your dedication to whatever, and to also choose your battles, you know. If you're going to be in it for the long haul, that's what you do. You choose your battles, and you know, stay with your convictions. That's what I think of when I think of Dr. King. I think of that, you know, for the long haul, in other words. So yeah, I just wanted to say that, you know, it's good that he did a lot of writing and things, you know, and I learned later on in years with the Warrior Women Project, and Beth Castle, Dr. Castle, she's the one that opened my eyes to the fact that you have to document things for the generations to come. You have to do those things, you know, be accountable for if your dedication is what you really believe in, you know, you need to document that. So that's what we've done with through our Warrior Women Project organization. So yeah, I you know, that was something that I came away with for his life and his legacy. It's written, it's recorded, and that's good. Thank you.
Thank you. For everyone tuning in, make sure you all watch the film, the Warrior Woman Project film. Go to warriorwomanfilm.com. Is that the website, Madonna?
Yeah, .org. Yeah.
.org. Okay, so everyone, make sure you all support that film and her legacy and her works, and we give her flowers today while she's alive, and all the works that she's doing. So once again, it's a great honor. I always want to make sure that everything that we do, we always have the elders there to be able to give us that wisdom. Is anyone have any last words or anything that they would like to share? Someone said, yay, Madonna. Well, I want to thank you all from the bottom of our heart at Indigenous Peoples Movement. Are we fulfilling the dream? So the question, are we fulfilling the dream? I think that listening to all of your answers is that we still have work to do. And one thing that Dr. Martin Luther King is that he was not just a dreamer. He was a person that was putting the dreams into actions. And that a lot of times, a lot of people, the way that they have given us his history and in his works is that he was just dreaming of a very peaceful land. But no, he put in a lot of work and he died for it as well. And so we want to continue the works of Dr. Martin Luther King, not just today, but every day. We want to continue to unite people. Coalition bill, Gyasi talked about that a lot today. Alejandra, all of us talked about that, about us coming together, because that is our unity. It's more powerful than an atomic bomb. And that's what Lakota People's Law Project is about. That's what Warrior Woman Project is about. And that's also what Indigenous Peoples Movement. We're a coalition-based organization. We do not have leaders, no faces or anything. It's all of the people of Indigenous people of the world that's coming together for us to be able to unite for change. And in order for us to continue that, we have to tell our stories, we have to document, and we have to continue to work. And that is the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And we will begin to fulfill the dream once we continue to do that. And by the grace of the Creator, that all of our children will be finally able to see what it feels to look over at the mountaintop and to hear the bells of freedom ringing. If we continue to work. So do not be discouraged. Like Madonna said, this is the long haul, and we got to keep working. So we got work to do. Thank you all. Continue to support Indigenous Peoples Movement, Lakota Laws Project, and Warrior Woman Film. And thank you to Alejandra, Gyasi, Ankush, Madonna, Gerald, Griggs. You all follow them. They're all doing amazing, amazing work. And Doksha, Matakiasi, we're all related.
Thank you.
Thank you.